My name is Megan, and I'm really happy to be here to share my story because, as we all know, contact with people recovering or living with a mental illness helps reduce the stigma, and that's always my hope when I go and speak at schools. And I also know that had I had that opportunity when I was in high school or even elementary school, that I surely wouldn't have waited so long to get help. I always knew that something was different with me, but I was too ashamed or confused to ask for help. I was down and at times felt worthless as early as grade 4. But to the people looking in at my life, it appeared pretty perfect. I had straight A's in school. I took part in a lot of extracurricular activities. I had friends that I would hang out with after school on the weekends. And my parents were still together, which was a rarity in my grade. And we lived in a nice house in a nice part of Toronto. But looking beyond that, my dad was basically a workaholic, working up to 80 hours a week. So he was kind of like a stranger in my own house, and we didn't have much of a relationship because of this. And that caused a lot of stress on us as a family unit. And my mom at times would drink to deal with that stress. And I remember sort of having to look after her and worry about how much she was going to drink and how we would get home if we were out, which caused me a lot of stress on me and caused me to grow up a lot faster than I should have. Grade 7 was when it all slowly sort of began to fall apart. It was then that I began to harm myself, and I was depressed and at times suicidal. I didn't talk to anyone about it besides my best friend, who was dealing with her own issues around anorexia at the time. And I've since learned that 75% of youth in the same situation as myself either talk to a friend or no one, and usually, like myself, the friend that they choose to talk to is struggling with their own issues and can't provide the support that's needed so much, and obviously they're not a professional and shouldn't be in that role. And it was no different for me. I never talked to anyone about what I was feeling, and I carried that depression around with me, and it began to negatively affect my life at school and at home. My grades over time began to drop, and I started to withdraw from a lot of my friends, and I withdrew from a lot of my activities that I used to enjoy, like band and cross country. I began to cry a lot, often without reason, not one that I could pinpoint. And I felt a deep physical pain and emptiness that I couldn't describe to anyone, and I didn't know how to. Later on, I would discover that that was one of the symptoms of my depression, but I didn't know it at the time, and I hadn't yet been diagnosed. At times, I felt hopeless and worthless, and I wouldn't get out of bed for days. Those were some of the first signs of my depression, and it felt scary and overwhelming. At times, it felt like I was the only one who felt this way. Therefore, I didn't think that anyone would understand or even know what I was going through if I tried to tell them, and I was really scared of what they would think of me. The stigma associated with mental illness stopped me from getting help. I was afraid and I felt ashamed of what I thought people would think and say. But I know now, looking back, that I had no reason to feel those ways. Back then, though, I didn't want people to see my depression as a character flaw or see me as weak. So, and because of this, I put a lot of work into looking or appearing normal on the outside, just look like I fitted in. And the effort that took was exhausting and overwhelming at times, and it took a lot of my energy just to do that on a daily basis. Part of the reason that I felt so bad was because I hadn't told anyone that I was sexually abused by my cousin. I never told anyone about what happened because I didn't think that anyone would believe me. I also didn't want to cause a rift between the two families. So for years after that, I did what most abuse survivors do, and I blamed myself for what happened. And that experience contributed greatly to the depression as well as the post-traumatic stress disorder that I was later diagnosed with. Back in grade 8, though, I was valedictorian at my grade 8 graduation. I was still dealing with the depression and self-harm, and I was actively preparing my first suicide attempt at the time that I was preparing my speech. But this was something that I really pushed myself to do. To add to the sort of chaos at his grade 8 graduation, we learned a couple weeks before grad that my aunt had been killed in a car crash. Losing her felt like I had lost my only ally in the world. She was the one who would help me with my mom if she had drank too much. She was there for me and she was my support. So losing her felt like I had to deal with everything by myself. I didn't really share my thoughts and feelings because I didn't want to burden anyone else that was, going through that pain. and seeing the pain that everyone else was going through at her loss only made me feel more depressed and more hopeless. I wanted to take her place because I was quite positive at the time that no one would miss me like they missed her. With all that going on, graduation sort of came and went, but it was more of a sad occasion than the happy one it should have been. The summer before grade 9, I lost contact with a lot of my friends from elementary school. I still pretended to have interest, but at the same time, I stopped answering their phone calls and started making up excuses as to why I couldn't meet with them. I spent a lot of that summer sort of in my room, in the dark, waiting for time to pass, which, as we all know, it did. Grade 9 started okay. I was from a really small elementary school, so high school was a huge culture shock for me. Soon I noticed that nobody really cared if I went to class or not, or if I did my homework, and I went from getting A's to C's and sometimes worse in that first semester. People had always told me when I was getting ready for high school that it would be the best years of my life, that it would be a chance to start over and I would have a great time. And for many people, that is true. But for myself, it just gave me the ability to just disappear. I'd eat lunch in the washroom or sometimes just walk for the whole lunch hour. Other times, I'd sit in the bathroom stall and cry or harm myself. And I'd hear people that I knew coming in and out of the bathroom, but I never let them know that I was in there hiding in that stall because, again, I was ashamed and afraid of what they would think of me. I harmed myself because I felt numb, as if I didn't really exist at all. It became my coping mechanism and almost obsessive at times. And it's been over 10 years now since I last harmed myself, and I've learned many coping strategies that have helped me deal with the thoughts and the feelings that led me to do it in the first place. Some of those, not all of them, but some of them include exercise, talking to other people. Writing has been a big help for me, as well as distraction techniques that were taught to me by one of my counselors. The scars that remain are a reminder of the past and how far I've come in the past couple of years. Going back to grade 9, though, I didn't really like or respect myself. I could barely tolerate myself, which is a hard feeling to describe to someone who may not have been there in that situation, but I felt like I was trapped in my body and that there was no escape. I had lost my sense of hope. All this led up to December 2nd, 1999, when I attempted suicide. I still remember the feeling of shame that I felt being carried out of my house on a stretcher and seeing all my neighbors crowded around my house like it was the scene of an accident and hearing the police and firemen talk about it just being, another suicide attempt. I was taken from my house to a hospital downtown and spent the next 5 hours being questioned from everyone from the doctors and nurses to the police and my parents. That was my first contact with the mental health system. And I felt alone and scared, and so did my parents. One policeman told me that I was lucky that my mom had come with me because some parents have refused to do so in the same situation. I was still really in denial about what was happening, and I wasn't quite sure how to put words to what I was experiencing. I knew that I needed help, but I wasn't really fully ready to accept it, and I also didn't know how to accept that help. So by the end of my week in the hospital, I sort of figured out what the doctors wanted to hear and kind of talked my way out of hospital. From there, though, I was lucky enough to be referred to an outpatient clinic, and my first meeting with them was in January of 2000, and my counselor and psychiatrist at the time diagnosed me as being clinically depressed, as well as suffering from obsessive-compulsive tendencies and post-traumatic stress disorder, which also contributed to anxiety. At times, it felt like I was the only one in the world who felt this way, who had these experiences. So knowing that what I was experiencing had a name, it gave me a sense of hope and made me feel a little bit more connected to the world. I also found hope by educating myself on my diagnoses so I could better understand what was going on. And in doing so, I came across a lot of people who were living very successfully despite these diagnoses or labels. And it gave me hope that I, too, in the future, could live just as successfully as them. When I first received my diagnoses, they blamed themselves, as many parents do. That my dad thought if he worked less, things may have been different, or if my mom drank less, that might have changed things. But in reality, I don't think it would have changed much. With time, education, and support for themselves, they later became my advocates. They advocated for me when I couldn't advocate for myself. And then later, they also received support through counseling with other parents, which was really helpful for them. All this happened over the Christmas holidays, and I went back to school after. Nobody really noticed that I was gone, but on the off chance that somebody did ask where I was, I just made up an excuse because I didn't want to be labeled the crazy girl of the school. In truth, I felt silenced by the stigma. I missed a lot of school that year, and later, after my 15th birthday, was hospitalized again when my parents found a loose journal entry detailing my next suicide attempt. I stayed in hospital for 3 weeks that time and decided that in order to do my credits for the year, that I would do them through homeschooling, which was an option for me, and I did do it. That choice, though, completely alienated me from any social contact that I did have. I now no longer had a reason to get out of bed. I had nowhere to go. No one was expecting to see me. So it just gave me an opportunity again to stay in bed, watch a lot of daytime TV, and just sort of wait for time to pass. Eventually, I did go back to the same school for grade 10, and I started talking to a couple of my friends from elementary school, and they slowly introduced me to some of their friends. They were all really great people, and I know many of them to this day, but back then in high school, they were the typical stoner group of the school. They never forced me to try marijuana, but eventually I chose to try it. And then before long, I was smoking before, during, and after school. Weed became my escape. Not that it was helping much, though. It was counteracting the effects of my medication, so I wasn't feeling much different, even though I was newly on medication and in counseling. With the medication, I started on Prozac, and then I moved to Effexor, and since then have been on multiple different medications and different combinations of the same. During my grade 10 year, I was in and out of hospital a couple different times, and during one of my last days there, the idea to go to a long-term psychiatric hospital was presented to me. When that was first suggested, I was scared. I felt overwhelmed. I, like many people, thought that I would be medicated, put in a straitjacket, put in a padded room, and sort of they'd toss away the key and I'd never get out. But when I agreed to go for a tour of the facility, I was greeted, I was pleasantly surprised that it was a warm, welcoming environment. I was greeted by the staff who knew my name. They made me feel accepted, and they made me feel welcome, which is something that I really hadn't felt in my life for a very long time. I stayed there for 8 months and did a lot of really intense work to try and change things. First, I really resisted and resented a lot of the work that they made me do, but my stay there is what saved me. My stay there is what gave me hope. It gave me hope for the future and a hope that things could, with work, get better. They gave me the tools that I first needed to confront my past and then to move on. And they also helped my family and I better understand each other through numerous family sessions. And there I was also able to meet new people who could relate to the experiences that I was going through. And that also gave me a sense of hope and connection to someone other than myself. After leaving the hospital, I went back to my house with my parents, and I went back to a different high school, and with the help of what was then the Section 23 classroom, I earned my high school diploma. After high school, I took a couple years off, I worked, I did some traveling, and just took some time to figure out who I was. After about 2 years, I went back to college for my social service worker diploma, and then continued on to York University and graduated in the summer of 2010 with my honors Bachelor of Social Work. I'm now a registered social worker working as a case manager on an assertive community treatment team in downtown Toronto. I've also been speaking with Tammy for the past, I said 10, but I hear it's 12 years, and was honored to receive the 2009 Mary Neville Award, as well as the 2010 Kaiser Foundation National Award for Excellence in Youth Leadership for my work with Tammy. Tammy has also given me hope for the future. Every time I speak, I have the opportunity to meet youth who are enthusiastic and they've been inspired by what they have learned and the speakers' stories to make a difference and to help erase the stigma that's in our communities and in the schools. This gives me hope for a future without the stigma surrounding mental illness. I've done all of this for about the past 8 years completely medication-free, which is something that along the way many doctors and workers told me that I wouldn't be able to do. That's not to say that later on down the road, be it months or years, that I may need to go back on the medication, and I'm okay to that and open to that conversation if and when it needs to happen. I was also lucky enough to marry my husband in September of 2010, and he's been a great support throughout my journey. We bought our first house together in May of 2013, and in August of that same year, we had our daughter Mackenzie, who's been a great addition to our family. My hope for her is that she grows up in a society where she knows that it's okay to talk about mental illness and it's okay to talk about mental health, and that there's no stigma surrounding it when she's growing up. I also reconnected with some of my friends back from high school, and they've turned into be some of my best friends. I've learned through being open with them that many of them were scared for me when I was ill. They didn't know what to do or what to say. And I think the most important thing we can do as a friend or a loved one of someone who's living with a mental illness is to be there to support them, to educate ourselves on the diagnosis or on the issue, to celebrate their successes no matter how small they may seem, and to realize that we don't have to know all the answers. Most of us are not trained professionals, but sometimes just being there is more than anything that you could say. Many people often ask me if I still have bad days, or, and of course I do. I'm human like everybody else in this room. I have days where I don't want to get out of bed, or I think that everything's useless. But now I know that they won't last forever, whereas before it felt like that was all I knew. I've also learned better coping techniques to learn and deal with those days when they happen. And most importantly, I have hope for my future. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my story with you. And thank you for all the work that you're doing in your respective homes and communities to erase the stigma with mental illness. Thank you.